Today, we are reopening one of history's greatest cold cases, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. But we're going to park the familiar story of a plane just lost at sea. Instead, we're diving into a really compelling theory that suggests she didn't just vanish, she survived. This one idea, from Rick Gillespie of the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or TIGHAR, completely flips the script. It's the foundation of what's known as the castaway theory. It suggests that Amelia Earhart didn't crash into the vast Pacific, but actually survived for days, maybe even weeks, marooned on a tiny, deserted island.
All right, so let's get into it. To even understand how this is possible, we have to go right back to Earhart's final radio transmission.
So in her last confirmed message, Earhart said she was flying on a line of position 157-337. Now, to a navigator, this isn't just jargon. It's a line on a map. She was basically saying, I know I'm somewhere on this specific line, and she was following it, hoping to run right into her target, Howland Island. Now, the official story, the one we all know, is that she just ran out of fuel, crashed into the ocean, and poof, sank without a trace. And the massive U.S. Navy search was based entirely on that one assumption, right? They scoured thousands of square miles of empty water. And here is the absolute key to this whole theory. Way later, two retired military navigators looked at that exact same line of position and had this incredible aha moment. They realized that if Earhart missed tiny Howland Island but kept flying on that exact line, it wasn't just empty ocean in front of her. That line led directly to a small, uninhabited atoll called Gardner Island, which today we know as Nikumaroro. And here's the crazy part. The original Navy search planes, they actually flew over this very island. They looked down, didn't see a crash plane, and just moved on. But wait, they did see something else. Their official report noted clear signs of recent habitation. They just dismissed it. They wrongly assumed that some work parties were living on the island. But you know what? No one had lived on Gardner Island since 1892. They saw the evidence of a castaway, but they had no idea what they were looking at. So after the official search was called off, a whole series of bizarre, kind of spooky and really compelling clues started to pop up, all suggesting that Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, were still very much alive. For almost a full week after she was supposed to be out of fuel, radio operators kept hearing these faint distress calls. The very first night, the crew of the Itasca, the ship waiting for her, logged hearing a woman's voice they were sure was hers. Then, an operator on the island of Nauru heard that same voice, but, and this is critical, with no engine hum in the background. She was on the ground. And then, over the next week, more than 100 similar calls were logged. Lockheed, the company that built her plane, pointed out a really crucial technical detail. See, to send messages night after night, the radio's batteries would need to be recharged, and the only way to do that was to run the plane's right engine. You can't do that if you're a wreck at the bottom of the ocean. It was only possible if the plane was on land, resting on its landing gear. She hadn't crashed. She had landed. And the evidence didn't just stop with those radio calls. Decades later, in 2010, researchers found a brand new clue in an old photograph. This picture was taken by a British colonial officer on Gardner Island just 3 months after Earhart disappeared. See, in the corner of that photo, almost hidden in the water, there was this object that just shouldn't be there. A forensic imaging analyst took a look, and their conclusion was stunning. The object was consistent with the landing gear from a Lockheed Model 10 Electra, Earhart's exact type of plane. At the exact same time all those distress calls were being heard, a 15-year-old girl in Florida named Betty Clank was listening on her family's radio. She grabbed a notebook and just started frantically writing down what she heard. She was convinced it was Earhart, arguing with a man who sounded confused, pleading for help. Now, part of what Betty wrote down seemed like total nonsense. She wrote New York, New York. But think about it. Researchers realized she was probably hearing Norwich City. Why is that important? Because the SS Norwich City was a massive British freighter that had wrecked on Gardner Island's reef years earlier. With no map, Earhart was likely describing the one giant landmark she could see, trying to tell rescuers exactly where she was. Okay, so we've got evidence of a landing, we have distress calls, and we have possible wreckage. But in 1940, the most tangible and, the most controversial piece of this whole puzzle was discovered on that very same island. So, a British officer on the island found a partial skeleton, 13 human bones. And next to them, fragments of a woman's shoe and a box designed to hold a sextant, a navigator's tool. The suspicion immediately pointed to Earhart. But a doctor in Fiji examined the bones and came to a firm conclusion. They belonged to a short, stocky male. And for decades, that was it. Case closed. The bones themselves were eventually lost, but luckily the doctor's measurements survived. Fast forward to 2018. A leading forensic anthropologist, Dr. Richard Jantz, reanalyzed those old measurements using modern, sophisticated techniques, and the results just completely turned that original assessment on its head. What Dr. Jantz's research showed was that forensic science back in 1941, well, it just wasn't really a thing yet. The methods they used to determine sex were, by our standards today, incredibly unreliable, sometimes barely better than a coin toss. The original examiner did the best he could with the science he had, but that science was just wrong. So with that initial male identification pretty much debunked, Jantz and his team could finally ask the question that had been off the table for over 70 years. To answer this, they had to do something pretty incredible. Since the actual bones are lost, they couldn't study them directly. So they used historical photos, information from her tailor about her clothing, and official documents to painstakingly reconstruct the likely lengths of Amelia Earhart's own arm and leg bones. For her height, for example, they looked at multiple sources. Her pilot's license said 5'8", this driver's license says 5'7". Using that range, they determined the castaway's bones belonged to someone of Earhart's stature, way taller than the original 1941 estimate of 5'5". And then came the final step. They took the measurements from the Nikumaroro bones and compared them to the reconstructed measurements of Amelia Earhart. The statistical similarity, it was just breathtaking. This chart here really shows you what they found. The analysis compared the Nikumaroro bones to a huge database of nearly 3,000 other people. And the result? Amelia Earhart's estimated bone lengths are more similar to the castaway's bones than 99.28% of all the people in that massive sample. That is an incredible match. Now look, in science, this is not the same thing as a DNA match. But as Dr. Jantz says, the statistical weight is just overwhelming. The simplest explanation is that the bones belong to Amelia Earhart. It creates this whole new, tragic, and deeply human story, not of a pilot who was lost to the sea, but of a castaway who survived, fighting to the very, very end on a remote, lonely island.